Hello and welcome back to the Nasty Metal Productions channel here at YouTube. And finally, welcome to the very last video for this channel of 2019. And of course, what better video to end the year with than with the end of the year list. This of course is my top 20 best or favorite, however you want to view this as, even though this is definitely a personal list of 2019. So, I know that this is definitely going to be a pretty long video, so without further ado, let's get into it. So, let's go to my Rate Your Music page, which is where I've got everything listed, because I know there's definitely a few albums in here that I don't own, however, I do have them digitally. So, coming in at number 20 is, of course, was the latest release from Swedish new wave or traditional heavy metal Titans. Technically, the band that spearheaded the whole movement, or helped with the spearheading of the whole, or pioneering the whole movement. That's of course this Enforcer with Zenith. Now, surprisingly, an Enforcer album is this low on the list. Again, albums like From Beyond and Death by Fire were higher in my list prior to this, but at least in past lists of past years. But this one is probably the first one that's probably made it pretty low, and I don't think this one would actually be that high in a lot of people's lists. Maybe some of those few would rate this a little higher, but most of the time, with the given the album that this is, it's definitely pretty low. Again, it's not a bad album from Enforcer, but this was not their best album, to be quite honest. I mean, it's very ambitious for what Olaf tried to do with this. If anything, this almost feels more like an Olaf Wickstrand solo album than it really should be an actual Enforcer album. I mean, some of the stuff on here, it's not bad, but I just think a lot of it is very inconsistent. And every time I do, and of course, the way I've been kind of feeling about this one more and more is by some of the various listens I've given this over time. And I know I did my review several months ago, because this release was definitely in the middle of this year, but you know, after that review and giving it subsequent listens, it's definitely become almost more harder to listen to, and I really had to kind of pull myself away from actually listening to it again, because if I did, I almost would have been taking it strictly off the list and just leave it to 19 albums, because this is, it becomes almost more frustrating to actually listen to it more and more times. It's just, it's almost making it to point almost we would consider this almost the worst Enforcer album. But it's definitely not a bad album. I really don't want to kind of give it that tag. It's far from being the worst album of this year, but it's definitely could almost be considered a slight disappointment. Either way, who knows, over time, I can end up having I almost feel like I'm going to have a love-hate relationship with this album. It's like I'll probably love it or like it at least one day, and then or at least a week, and then 2 weeks or a month later, I'm going to be back to probably shitting on it. It's just that kind of way it gives me. It's like almost like a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde effect with this album. It's like you either want to like the album, or then a few times, or even within a day, you're almost hating it. It's just that kind of effect. Definitely far from the best album from Enforcer, but it ain't the worst. But it's definitely one I really had to kind of rate pretty low, because of, it just hasn't, when I put it on, there's just some parts where it just gets too corny for me, or it just becomes, like, what the hell were they thinking? Still, not a bad album, but yeah, I'm just gonna have to kind of stop talking about it, because again, this is almost gonna make the video even longer. Alright, so coming at number 19, this album I actually digitally downloaded a few years ago, actually a few months ago, several months ago, off of Bandcamp. This is a Spanish band, new band to me. They're called Orion, and the album is called Usurp, and this is actually their third album release. Definitely just some solid Spanish metal. Definitely at times pulling towards the more thrashier ends of things, but it's definitely on bit on the heavy metal side. Definitely not bad. All sung in their native in Spanish and everything. Just a very solid release from Orion. Definitely good. So that was at number 19. So coming in number 18 is the newest release from, of course, early death metal band originally known as Incubus. This is Opprobrium. Opprobrium is actually, I think, the best way to pronounce the name. This is Fallen Entities, released through High Roller Records this year. Just a solid death metal album. Definitely plenty of solid cuts on it. Definitely not bad. Was definitely released, I think, pretty much early within the year. Just solid stuff. Again, I don't know if I can say this is probably my favorite album from Opprobrium, or probably at least when they were known as Incubus. Still, probably the best album they ever recorded, in my opinion, is still probably Serpent Temptation, which was their first album when they were called Incubus, which has a solid death metal album, death thrash metal or so. Definitely an album that almost kind of has some early Morbid Angel type of influences on that album. And that was like 87, 88. These guys were definitely were kicking it around the time that even guys like Possessed and Death were pretty much kicking out tunes. So, great album from Opprobrium. So, now, coming in at number 17 is a newer thrash metal band. This, of course, is called Phantom Witch, with their album Death As We Know It. And this is actually their debut full-length album. This band actually had at least, 2 demos released prior to this. And the reason I actually found about this band was because of my brother, which I think one of the musicians in the band was actually filling in for some punk band. I forgot the name of it. Who knows? Who probably watching it pretty much say which band it was. But right now I can't completely think of the band. But this is a newer thrash metal band. Great album. Very much vigorous, heavy, vicious thrash metal. Just definitely has definitely an assault on the ears for sure. Definitely has that vibe. It's just a great thrash metal album. Definitely one if you're one of those that loves thrash metal and definitely loves to check out newer bands. Definitely check this album out. It's definitely worth the listen. I almost thought about doing a review on this one, but because of the time and usually the days that I have to upload stuff, there just wasn't a way to fit it. But definitely, I definitely wanted to kind of talk a little bit about this in this list. So definitely a solid, great debut album from Phantom Witch. And who knows, I probably would link their band, some of the ones that have Bandcamp pages. I'll definitely link them in the description box. So definitely a great album from a band that I definitely look forward to over the years. And I hope that they still keep releasing albums, because I can just see this band progressing more and more with each album. Definitely a solid beginning for Phantom Witch. Now, coming at number 16 is the newest release from, of course, Queensryche. This is The Verdict. Is, of course, the third album, and is, of course, new vocalist Todd Latour, who came in the band in 2013, which was definitely in the middle or early of this decade. This is definitely another solid album. I'll definitely probably put this somewhere next to the first album with Todd Latour, the self-titled album. It's definitely another solid Queensryche album. Definitely, again, back to being more metal. Very, very progressive still, but it definitely I would say this one is probably a little more melodic and definitely more traditional metal influenced than probably some of the past 2 Queensryche albums with Todd Latour, but this is definitely good. Definitely a solid album. Who knows whether or not if this is going to be the last or the first album without Scott Rockenfield, who of course wasn't present on the recording of the album. Who knows what the state with him and the band is, but definitely this was a solid album from Queensryche. So that was at number 16. Number 15 is another one that I do own here. Hard rock album. Definitely what was an album I was surprised by. This, of course, is Sammy Hagar and the Circle with Space Between. This, of course, was another one of Sammy Hagar's and Michael Anthony's supergroup fill bands. But this one's different from, like, Chicken Foot. This definitely features let me bring it up, because it doesn't have Joe Satriani on guitar. It's got, who is it? Let me look. Real quick. I just lost the little sticker. Vic Johnson. And, of course, Jason Bonham on drums. Of course, the son of the late John Bonham of Led Zeppelin fame. Definitely, this was an album I was definitely surprised by. It's got more of a blues rock feel to it that I actually enjoy and actually prefer over what I heard Chicken Foot. Because I think Vic Johnson, is probably a guy who I'm not very familiar with as a artist or as a musician, but I think this style right here just works better for me, and it seems to suit Sammy Hagar's voice even better, and it could probably compare it to what I at least heard of Chicken Foot. I mean, there is definitely some throwbacks on here to, of course, Sammy Hagar's early solo stuff, and of course even his stuff with Montrose. The track Trust Fund Baby is definitely, the riff is definitely taken straight from I Got the Fire, or I've Got the Fire from Montrose, which is definitely one of the best hard rock songs that come out of the mid to late 70s. It's a great track, and it's definitely one of the few straight up hard rockers on the album, but to be quite honest, I just really prefer this album over some of the, at least what I heard of Chicken Foot. I even kind of prefer this even over the Sammy Hagar stuff with Van Halen for sure. Whether or not if I prefer this over his solo stuff, I'll say it's probably some of the best stuff he probably did since maybe, was it maybe Standing Hampton or, VOA, something like that, but I think it definitely kind of goes even back to at least a little bit of the early Montrose stuff, and at least at times definitely solo albums being like Street Machine and Danger Zone and some of those aspects. So it definitely was a solid album from him, and I definitely wasn't expecting to actually like this as much as I did. So there you go, Sammy Hagar and the Circle at number 15. Alright, so at number 14 is a band I just recently or at least last week, I did an Album of the Week video on. This, of course, is a Argentinian heavy metal band called Silverblade. This, of course, is their self-titled debut album, which came out actually in October of this year. I definitely don't have to talk too much about this one because I already did a Album of the Week video spotlight, which was definitely disguised more as a review in some aspects. So it was just a great album. Just solid traditional heavy metal, definitely in the more new wave or traditional heavy metal style and everything. Great stuff. Most of the album, of course, being all within sung mostly in their native language. About 30 songs only sung in English. Great stuff, great vocals, and just great riffs and melodies and so on. It was a great pounding heavy metal album. Definitely a great album for sure. That was at number 14. So, coming at number 13 is, of course, the comeback album from, of course, New Orleans thrashers Exhorter with More in the Southern Skies, and I would say this is a very solid album from Exhorter. It's definitely different sounding. I almost was I was deciding whether or not I would have done a review on this one, but I decided not to. But this is I would say, is a solid album. Again, it's different from Saw in the Vatican. I mean, it's not nearly as aggressive or as mean or as piss and vinegar fueled as that album was, but nor is it nearly as kind of doomy or group as The Law, which I thought was another great album from Exhorter. But this one, it's got its own mystique, its own feel, its own character. It definitely, I would say, at times pushes more towards almost it almost has a very stonery, doomy feel to this album, which definitely could come from the fact that, who knows, they probably were listening to quite a bit of Black Sabbath during some of this album, because there's definitely some songs where it definitely almost has kind of a more of a Dio era Sabbath feel to me, almost like something off of like maybe the first two albums of Born Again, and some aspects with some of the choice lead work, which some of the guitar work on here is actually quite good, and it's definitely at times melodic, but there is still some of that thrashy, aggressive stuff, at least, that harkens a little bit back to Song of the Vatican. I mean, they do, what was it, I think it's called Ripping Flesh, which is a re-recording of a song that was not on their very first album, but instead was actually on one of their very first demo. So they actually went and took a really early track and definitely re-recorded for the album. And in a way, it's definitely a good track. Probably not my favorite version, but it's definitely for those who are looking for at least a little bit of that early sound. It's definitely at least some aspects is on here, and that song is definitely one. Overall, I don't think this was a bad album, or even because I know there's definitely some have definitely praised the album, but I definitely have been from a few friends who are not very keen on the album. But to me, I think it's a solid album from them. So, Exhorter with More in the Southern Skies at number 13. Coming on number 12 is the album that you can kind of hear slightly in the background. This, of course, is a band I just recently did a Album of the Week video on. This, of course, is a Portland, Oregon-based U.S. panel band. This is Magnabolt with another self-titled debut album this year. Self-titled again off of Bandcamp. Great, solid album. I definitely talked a bit about this, so I don't need to talk more about it. It's just a solid U.S. power metal band, and I hope that the band, like I said in that same video, I hope they don't stay on hold for very long. This was just a great, solid album. So, there you go. Magnabolt, the self-titled debut album at number 12. So, coming in number 11 is another album I also contemplated about doing a review on. This, of course, because was it 2 years ago, I did a review on this one, or at least on their album previous to this one. This, of course, is Overkill with The Wings of War, which is their album at the end, the decade, and man, what a decade Overkill had. I mean, releasing Ironbound in the beginning of the decade in 2010, and then, of course, ending it with The Wings of War. These guys were on a fucking roll. I mean, again, from Ironbound to the Electric Age to White Devil Armory, and already I'm kind of forgetting the last album. Let me go to here real quick. There's one album I'm starting to forget about. Because again, this is their 5th album this decade. Just on a fucking roll. Here we go. The Grinding Wheel. And of course, The Wings of War. And each one of these 5 albums were just fantastic. But this is probably, they're ending the decade, I would say, with probably their most vicious, most thrashiest, most pissed album they've probably released this decade. And it seemed like each album, they definitely were just getting heavier. This is probably the heaviest, to me, of these 5 albums that they've released this decade. And again, just a great album. I mean, Bobby Blitz is just is pretty much killing it on every cylinder on this album. Just shooting from every single angle, every single way. Is just everyone is just fucking tight on this album. This was another great album from Overkill. So, definitely one of Overkill's finest albums, and what a album to end the decade off. So hopefully their next decade is just as strong as this one. Hopefully they just keep going, because these guys are like a well-oiled machine. They're never gonna break down. Just that's kind of the way these guys been kicking it since the 1980s and to the 2010s. These guys just knew when there's to keep the ball running. Just a great thrash metal band. So Overkill with The Wings of War. Woo! That was just, again, the first 10 albums there. Now it's finally to get into the top 10 list. And this is probably going to get a little bit longer, I guess. And again, one of the longer videos. So here we go. Number 10 is another album I was also contemplating about doing a review. I didn't. But it's definitely a great album for sure. And I mean, I gave this one about 2 listens for sure. This is a I know that's not enough, but even on those 2 listens, it just surprised me for how good this album is. Of course, is another comeback album this decade, and of course, at the end of the year, probably one of the most long-awaited comeback albums everyone's waiting for ever since when this band was put back together. This, of course, is Possessed with Revelations of Oblivion. Again, definitely the only original member left in this band, of course, is Jeff Becerra, who, of course, is no longer doing bass because of the whole incident that happened like a decade ago. Of course, being paraplegic and stuff. He still sounds great. I mean, I would say the sound of this album definitely is taking off where stuff like Beyond the Gates and, of course, the Eyes of Horror EP definitely kind of left off. And I mean, this would have been the perfect album to come after the Eyes of Horror. This would have been great if this was released back in 1989 or at least 1990. It just has that feel. I mean, sure, with the modern production and everything, it definitely does kind of, I guess, take away a little bit of the rawness a little bit, because that's the one thing about Possessed. 7 Churches and Beyond the Gates were definitely raw, guttural, very vicious sounding thrash albums. Even though they definitely were one of the pioneers of the whole death metal sound, they definitely were more raw and more guttural thrash. And this one is no exception. It's definitely continues that. It's got plenty of it. It's definitely thrashy for sure. I mean, this is a raw, guttural thrash metal album, but just in spirit. It's just a fantastic album from Possessed, and I think this was definitely one of the best. Now, I mean, there's plenty of solid songs here. Definitely that call back to even albums, to some aspects, 7 Churches, Beyond the Gates. I mean, in the cover artwork for Revelations of Oblivion is definitely inspired by Beyond the Gates. Even though if you had gotten the slipcase copy, the slipcase would have copied the 7 Churches album cover, which was definitely very simple, just a black background with their logo, which was very demonic looking, and of course the font, the title of the album being embossed on the cover. But definitely a solid album from Possessed and a great comeback, and hopefully this is at least going to lead to more subsequent albums, because these guys should have at least released a few more albums in their prime. This was just how solid the band was. So there you go, at number 10 with Revelations of Oblivion by Possessed. So at number 9 is surprisingly a band that I actually got introduced very many years ago. This, of course, is a band called Gore, with their recent album called Revanche. Now, Gore, of course, are a Dutch noise rock band formed back in the 1980s. Their very first album came out like in 1985, 86, somewhere around there. And mostly were instrumental. Never had a vocalist. These songs, and here, Revanche is actually not really a collection of new songs. It's actually all re-recording. I think it's actually a re-recording of their 1992 album, Lifelong Deadline. That was a 2-disc, but they went and re-recorded and condensed it to at least one album. At least they just kind of cherry-picked some of the songs I guess the band liked for re-recording of it, and basically, again, this is what we got. And of course, this album was actually engineered or mastered or slightly reproduced by Terry Date, who, of course, just to name a few, bands like Dark Angel, Metal Church, and of course Slayer. Definitely, this was another surprising album for me. This was definitely great. Again, all instrumental. I don't know if I can call this complete noise rock. It's definitely more metal sounding. It definitely has a lot of influences from like thrash. Very technical in places. Definitely proggish, but more so because of the time changes and just the whole drip changes with each song and the tempos and all of that. It definitely changes throughout each song, and it's just, again, another freaking rip you by the face riff after riff after riff. Just definitely a solid album from these guys for even a re-recorded albums. It's still great. I mean, of course it was released this year, but it's just a great album from a band I don't really give much listens to, but I almost should, because this is a fantastic album from them. So there you go. At number 9 with Revanche from Netherlands' own Gore. Alright, so coming at number 8, so I guess it's going to be all CDs finally. So this is going to be a little more easier for me. Or at least CDs and 2 records. This band I actually got introduced this year, and it was live. These guys opened for Anvil, and they had just released an album in February. This, of course, is Archer Nation, which, of course, with their, at this point, 3rd album, even though their original were known as Archer, but this is their first album with the new name Archer Nation. It's titled Beneath the Dream, released on David Ellefson's own label NMP, which, of course, David Ellefson being, of course, Megadeth fame. Just a great album. These guys, are, of course, are actually based out of... Santa Cruz, California. Definitely a great metal album. Definitely very technical again. I would say these guys, in my review, they definitely fall somewhere within 90s era Megadeth. Definitely on this album. Mostly, at least, Rust in Peace up to about Euthanasia. That sort of period of Megadeth. I don't really hear much of cryptic writings. I definitely don't hear Risk. But it definitely falls in with there. Maybe also throwing a little bit of influences. Maybe some of the 2000s era Megadeth. But it definitely has more of a 90s period Megadeth sound to it. Of course, the singer here, Dylan Rosenberg. His voice definitely reminds me a lot of Dave Mustaine. But maybe more probably more better sounding. Probably definitely more cleaner sounding than more melodic sounding than Dave Mustaine, but definitely great guitar playing, a lot of great riffs, definitely a solid album from, of course, Archer Nation. Is again Beneath the Dream at number 8. Alright, so coming on number 7 is, of course, the newest release from, of course, British rock giants Whitesnake. Been going on since the late 70s, and again, David Coverdale just seems to be like a machine. He just seems to not quit, and that's the thing I respect about. And here, he also seems to keep his voice intact. I mean, I would say he sounds fantastic on this album. I did a review on this one. I don't need to talk too much about it. This is definitely a solid album from Whitesnake, again, Flesh and Blood, released through Frontiers Records. Great album, nothing bad on this album, just a great Whitesnake album. So that's at number 7. Again, at number 6 here, this, of course, is another album I did a review on. This, of course, is the 3rd album from Seox, titled Fallout Rituals. Again, just a solid speed metal album from, of course, Carmine Blade and Co. and stuff. Again, friends with the guy. Great album. Probably this might be their, probably right now, the best Seox album. This is fantastic speed metal. Definitely even some of the best production here. It just sounds very great for what this is. And again, released through Shadow Kingdom Records early this year. Great album. So, at number 6, with Fallout Rituals from Seox. Alright. Here we go. We finally are at the top 5 of the list. So, this one is going to take up quite a... Who knows if this is going to extend it to 35 minutes or 40. But we'll see. Let's definitely go right in. At number 5, we've got the recent album from, of course, New York metal underground cult band. This, of course, is The Rods with Brotherhood of Metal, which was, of course, was released through Steamhammer this year. great album from the Rods. I would say this is probably the best Rods album since, probably since Heavier Than Thou. I mean, their comeback album was actually released early this year, or at least early this decade, I meant to say. What's it called? Vengeance, I believe the album was titled, which was a good album. But this is even better, more solid, and everything. I mean, there's just plenty of great cuts on this one. I mean, the opening track is probably the most epic song here, being titled Brotherhood of Metal. Very Manowar-ish in sound. Of course, the drummer Carl Kennedy actually produced the very first Manowar demo. Of course, Carl Kennedy, of course, produced many of albums for like Megaforce and that. Of course, I just talked about Possessed. He produced Beyond the Gates. So he produced plenty of great albums for plenty of bands. But this was his band, along with, of course, David Rock Feinstein, being the cousin of the late Ronnie James Dio and being an original member of Elf, which was Ronnie James Dio's early blues rock band. But again, great album. There's nothing bad on here. Just, again, solid heavy metal from, of course, New York's own The Rods. Alright, so coming on number 4. There's, of course, an album I just recently did a review on. This came out, again, within the middle part of this year. Of course, this British band, Ensemble, with World Shaker. Definitely raising that Motorhead, Tank, New Wave, or British heavy metal flag in terms of sound. It was a great album. Nothing really bad to say. I don't have to say much about it. I did a review on it. But this was a solid album. Their third album in for this band. Just a great album from Ensemble, released through Heavy Psych Sounds. Just great, raw, again, in-your-face, British, punky, speedy, heavy rock and roll. Great stuff. Alright, so coming in number 3, I mean, these next 3 here could have also, I mean, any of this, this third one could have been number 1 for me. This was a fucking great album. This is a live album, and probably the first live album from this band is, of course, the Sweden's own Bullet, with Bullet Live. Double Live, of course, and I mean, they could have either called this Bullet Double Live, but this is a great live album from Bullet. I even once thought of doing a review on this one, doing like my very first review of a live album, but I didn't. Still, this is fantastic stuff. I mean, this is also a great retrospective of this band. I mean, you get at least everything, at least from their first album to, of course, the most recent album, which came out last year, Dust to Gold. Just great stuff here. Just very good meat and potatoes, in your face, heavy metallic, heavy rock and metal. Just great stuff. There's really nothing bad on here. I mean, this almost could call this the greatest hits album. This is just that kind of feel. I mean, if I had really give somebody a Bullet album to check out if they want to actually check this band out, this would be an album to really also get if you want to get into the band. This right here is a great album. Pretty much probably right now could be either No Sleep Till Hammersmith or the Live and Dangerous or the Made in Japan kind of album. It's just that type of album. It's great. Or Live After Death. It's up there as one of the best live albums right now. So, there you go. Bullet Live. So, coming number 2. This album was going to be number 1. I mean, I love this album. I was playing this one pretty much. This came out, was it October or late October? And I pretty much was almost considering this number 1 because I was playing the fuck out of this album every freaking day. And I still have a way of still playing it. I mean, it's still freaking good. This, of course, is the newest album from, of course, Australian rockers. This is Airborne with Bone Shaker. Again, I don't think they've released a bad album, and this one is no exception. This is far from it. This is a fantastic hard rock album. I mean, sure, you can say that that's a completely, retread the wheel or something. It ain't a groundbreaking album, but it's definitely a great, fun, hard rock album. There's just not a bad song on here. I mean, you got also probably right here some of the best songs that the band probably ever has released recently, being Weapon of War and Rock and Roll for Life. And Rock and Roll for Life is a great way to end the album. They definitely had a way of definitely kind of throwing in some little interesting ideas on here. It's just a great, solid, hard rock album from Airborne. So there you go at number 2 with Bone Shaker. So what is number 1? I guess these guys take the number 1 spot again. And the last time these guys took the number 1 spot was 2015. This, of course, is the newest album. Well, of course, Ram. This, of course, is The Throne Within. And when I gave this a listen, I was like, you gotta be kidding me. These guys can't take the number 1 spot again. The album Subversum from 2015 was my number 1 album of that year, and they did it again. I mean, Rod was close, but that number 1 spot went to Vultures, The Guillotine. Come back 2 years later, and they put out an album I would say is almost close to being just as good as Subversum. This is a great album. Definitely more, like again, in my review, more melodic, but it's still great. It's definitely still got a very heavy feel. It's just a great album. There's nothing here I really could say anything more about. I did a review on it. Just a great, great album, and definitely right here, my number 1 album of this year. So there you have it. My top 20 of 2019. So with that, I hope you all enjoyed. What are your favorite albums of this year? So what are your favorite albums? Definitely put those in your post or some in the reply section and everything of this video. So with that, this is my last video of 2019. I'll be coming back with some interesting videos because I'm probably going to be doing a retrospective of this whole decade. So with that, I hope you all enjoyed. I hope you all have a great New Year's. So with that, this is Harry Thrasher Sam out. And I'll see you all later. Take care, everyone.